Welcome to another time of Alicia Records Books. I don't exactly know the frequency. I was going to say welcome to like another week, month, but really just how frequently I'm able to push these books through. So, this is where I'm Alicia. I'm a licensed therapist and I love reading. I also love raising awareness on accessible quality resources. And while I love that there's a wealth of information out there, it can also be overwhelming about what books to pick, what information is helpful, and I'm here to hopefully help you filter that out. I talk a lot, so I'm going to be taking breaks so I don't ruin my throat because we've got a doozy of a book this week. Um, I was so excited to read it. It's called Unmasking Autism by Devon Price, who's a PhD. They are also the author of Laziness Does Not Exist. I've heard wonderful things about both books. I was so excited to read Unmasking Autism. I got it for a book club with like a therapist book club because, of course, I'm in a therapist book club. And everyone I've talked to who has read it has just said wonderful things about it. I've heard it from clients, from colleagues, from people on Facebook groups. Everyone raves about it. I'm here to kind of be the bearer of bad news, but I didn't love it. So my initial ranking, and I'm going to go into what I liked and what I didn't like, and maybe that will help you decide if this is a good book for you. For me, it was a 2 out of 5. 2 out of 5 stars. Now, full disclosure, I am not someone who is autistic. I was going into it hoping to learn more about how to better serve clients and loved ones who are autistic. So, my caveat with the ranking is if you are autistic or think that you may be autistic, then I'm actually going to go 5 out of 5 because I think it's a really good exploratory book, and everyone who has raved about it has autism. And so I think this might be just where like it's not a book for me, and that's okay. So, what is this book really about? Well, it's a social psychologist who shares their own experience and journey with autism. They got diagnosed later in life, and they do a great job talking about myths around autism, the harmful societal pressures that is in, and then a lot about unmasking. I mean, it's in the title, Unmasking Autism. So, ways to unmask, what is it, how is it protective, all that good stuff. They use a lot of good stories, both personal as well as from people that they've interviewed, and then some like good tangible exercises throughout the book and at the end of a lot of chapters. So I think it's really good and it's helpful if you are trying to better understand if you are autistic and how to live more authentically. If you're wanting to just like learn more about it and be a better ally or a better therapist or helper, probably not the book for you. So I'm actually going to start with what I didn't like about it because you might be thinking, well, Alicia, if you're recommending it for people who are autistic or potentially autistic, why are you ranking it a 2 out of 5? Because I used to be a copy editor and I'm in the middle of writing my own book. And so I'm a big language person and I'm super nitpicky. So here's my honest thoughts. And don't worry, there's lots of stuff that I like about the book too. So, for starters, I'm a big language person. If you are new to this realm of my life, I talk a lot about the language we use, how we internalize it, how the hidden implications of it, the history of the language. I nerd out over language. As someone who's also very active on social media as a professional therapist, I'm also very intentional with the language that I use and about kind of calling out how other people who are helpers and therapists and professionals, the language that they use. So in this book, I was super bummed because there's a lot of generalized language in the book. What the heck does that mean? Well, generalized language is when we say things like, this always happens, this never happens. It's grouping all these experiences or just like making these blanket statements without talking about the nuance of things, which doesn't seem like a big deal to most people, but one of the main, I mean, it's literally called Discovering the New Faces of Neurodiversity. And one of the author's main themes throughout the book is how diverse and unique autism is for so many people and how misunderstood it is. And we can't be putting people in these rigid boxes, which I so agree with. But then most of the language that they use are things like, always, never, all the people who have autism, all therapists, all this. And I'm like, wait, what? That's not actually relatable then. And here's an example, because you might be thinking, Alicia, you're just making a big deal out of this. So here's a direct quote from the book. It says, all masking is about setting our feelings aside so we can focus on pleasing others or conforming to social norms. This is always going to be a self-destructive value system to live by. Now, I don't hate that statement if we did a few tweaks, because it says all masking. So that's already a bold statement right there, right? Saying all masking is about doing two things. And as a reader, I'm instantly like, but it's not, right? Like I have clients who mask and I've like there's just so many other things. And so for a book that's trying to help you relate and feel seen and feel understood, it just seemed like a big disconnect there. It also says this is always going to be a self-destructive value system. Again, that's a bold statement. While I agree that masking can be harmful and isn't fair, we also know, and like they even write in the book how it's also used as like a survival and protective factor. And it's like sometimes it's just not worth the energy. So again, like you can think that I'm overreacting and that's fine, but I appreciate when professionals use even words like most of the time, a lot of the time, sometimes for some people, because especially for something like autism that is so diverse in how it's presented and even what we know about it, to say something like all masking or this is always going to be destructive, it actually doesn't have a very inclusive like tone to it. And that's so not the message that this author is wanting people to feel. So that's one of my biggest things. And I was tabbing a lot. I actually took a lot of my tabs out for book clubs. I didn't want them to think that I was so neurotic, but there's almost on like every page, there's these big blanket statements. And I was just like, come on, we can do better. We have to be nuanced because this is a person with a PhD, if we are the professional trying to give information to, this book is for like everyone, not just other professionals, we have to take ownership and be responsible for the language that we're using and the information that we're sharing. So that's why nuance is so important to me. Okay, if you're still sticking with me, I promise there's good stuff too, but I wanted to like rip the band-aid off. We're gonna get through this. I promise there's good stuff. Until we get to the good stuff, I also didn't love that there were a lot of contradictory messages throughout the book. And it was really hard because again, I went into it wanting to like learn more about how I can better be an ally, how I can be a better advocate, how I can be a better therapist, how I can be a better support system for loved ones. And so again, like this book wasn't for me, and that's totally fine. But then even when they're talking about, okay, well, we need to include more people with disabilities and accommodation stuff, so there's better access to resources. Yes, please. But then they also, like in the next sentence, will be like, but we can't diagnose people, or we can't set like checklist, or diagnosing isn't important. We don't want rigid diagnosis because it's so diverse. And I'm like, also, yes, but then it's like, what do we do? Do we advocate for more people to get these diagnoses so then they can get the accommodations and access to resources and have better environments to succeed in? Or do we take away labels and but like what do we do? So I felt like they were kind of just like saying spicy hot takes without actually giving answers or steps on what we can do. So while I agree with their messages of hell yeah, we need better accommodations and access to resources and healthier working environments for people to succeed in. But it's like, well, how do we get there? Like I love the idea. I want like some action. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. So maybe that was just like me being in a different headspace. But I did like it lit a fire, so like that works. But it was also just like kind of like I felt like I was getting whiplash in a lot of places. I was like, oh, you're saying this, oh, but then this, and then this, and I felt like it was all over the place. speaking of the contradictory messages and going all over the place, I also felt like there was just too much going on in the book. Like it was jumping around, like it's called Unmasking Autism. So I thought it was going to be more of a primer of, a little bit about the myths and the stereotypes, which they do a good job on. We're getting to that in a little bit. And then how to unmask and the things that we can do to be more authentic. And again, they do that. But then they also just like jump around to these things that don't really like they matter and like they have I can see like the thread of why when we have like it's a relatively like normal size self-help book, like we can't do everything. Like autism is so understudied and understood and there's so much that we need to do to be better and to be able to help people better. I agree with all of that, but one book can't do all the things. And I felt like they were trying to. They're like, "Hey, we need to talk about ADHD and the systems that we are in and working and this and this." And while I agree, it also felt like they just again like a hot take like threw it out there, but then didn't go deeper. And why do I think that's important? Well, one, because I think there's other books about autism. And so I was really like wondering what is this book adding to these other ones? And they even reference the other books in there. Like they're like, hey, here's this book, this book, this book. Go check those out. There's these other resources. I love that. So I was really hoping, okay, well, if there are these other books that are kind of these more generalized things, what are we getting new from this book? And we do that by being able to go deeper into some of those things. And I feel like we just didn't. Like, they just like throw out these things and then like for 3 sentences and then they move past it. And so I just felt like it was doing too much where it was hard for me to stay focused and be like, okay, like this is what this book is clearly about. This is who I'm going to be able to recommend it to. And this is how it's going to help me or help other people. Like it just didn't have a clear focus or purpose. And I was really bummed by that because, like I said, so many people loved it. And I just was like, how do I, like, even writing the summary, I was like, how do I accurately write the summary? Because they were doing so much in the book and I don't really know. Alrighty. The other, like, big thing that I was super bummed by is it, so it kind of relates to my other point of they didn't really give clear like direction or next steps. So a lot of the theme throughout the book is also talking about how autism can look like trauma, anxiety, depression, other diagnoses, and how it can be really harmful to misdiagnose people or mistreat people, in the mental health system and the other systems that we are in. Again, 1000% agree. So then what I was hoping for was, well, how do we tease this apart, right? Like I specialize in trauma, anxiety, and depression. Most therapists work with anxiety, depression. Um, and so if there's this huge overlap between those, how are we going to be able to accurately help people? How do we tease that apart? And it wasn't. It was just again like the hot take of, hey, these therapists suck at diagnosing, the system sucks, which it does. But then it's like, well, what do we do with it? Like, if I have to diagnose someone to be able to get reimbursed for insurance, how do I accurately say, well, you have anxiety, you have depression, or no, this is actually autism, which we're going to get to later, but I can't even diagnose autism. So it's just really crappy. I I like that they gave examples of possible behaviors that could be like little indicators of someone with autism or someone who's autistic. But again, there was no nuance. And so, as someone who specializes in trauma and anxiety, they would like say a behavior and then it's like, yes, that could be autism, but it could also be trauma. It could also be anxiety. Like they gave an example of if you look at a menu ahead of time, then you are likely autistic because you're trying to, do all these things. And I was like, no, that's a good, thing that someone can actively like look for and be like, hey, that relates to me. I do that. This could help explain this behavior. Love that. But there's no like acknowledgement of, well, I also know people who have like dietary restrictions or food restrictions, so they often look at the menu ahead of time to see what they can order. It could be that they have just generalized social anxiety. It could be that they are traumatized from people in charge and they fear speaking or whatnot. It could be that they are stressed financially and so they want to see like the prices for things. So this is again just like a general statement where they're like, oh, here's this statement, but then we're not actually going to talk about the nuance of it. And so again, I get stuck then in how do we move forward? I can't just say, oh, the client told me that they looked at the menu ahead of time before they went out with their friends. Oh, it must be autism. Because that's also could be a disservice too if it's not. So it was just kind of like I was a little bit bummed by that. Again, with the contradictory messages as well, they basically said there's no evidence-based treatments in terms of like mental health treatments for autism. But then later on, they also were like, but narrative therapy works. And they're like, and we need to get better diagnosis. And so again, I'm just like, well, what is it? Like, and I think they were trying to say that like autism itself doesn't need to be fixed, which I agree with. They do a great job of talking about like how harmful ABA therapy is, and how it's meant to like more like fix things to make people feel like do more like neurotypical stuff. So I agree that like we don't have to fix the autism traits, but like people with autism still are going to experience other things and like can benefit from therapy. And they basically were just like, nope, therapy sucks. But also this one is actually helpful. And I was like, what? I just couldn't follow. So it just they were just jumping around. And even when they were trying to like talk about some of the research, because they do look like they're a researcher, they're a PhD researcher, professor. And so they would talk about, well, here's this evidence and here's this research, and this might be my own bias because my husband's a researcher. Um, you can't really like take like evidence from over here and then be like, so this must mean this over here. Like, unfortunately, there's all this like super nerdy, scientific process stuff that we have to do. So they're like, well, we see these behaviors in transgender people. And so then that must mean that people with autism also do these things. And I was like, again, it's a small language thing where they could say, hey, we found that there's these behaviors that we found in this study. Future research could do this with autistic people and see if this could help explain some of those things. So, again, I know I'm being nitpicky, but when you're presenting yourself as a professional, like you literally have a PhD, I think we need to hold ourselves to good standards and say, like we need to be responsible with the power that we have and the information that we share. So again, I know I'm probably a little bit biased because my husband's a researcher, but I was like, this is a big leap. Like, and it was multiple times. Again, I was tabbing all these things where I was like talking about like mice here and then this, and all we have to really do is add that extra sentence and say, well, we saw this, and because there's crap research for this field, future research, or we need to be able to further explore these things. Here's this like hypothesis we can do. Then I'm all about that, right? But to be able, like, language is important to say, hey, we found this over here, so that must mean this. And again, we're generalizing it to all these people. That's not really how that works, and that can be really harmful. Alrighty. The last thing I want to just talk about with language too is, which it honestly surprised me that they used the word problematic a few times. There was an entire chapter about like problematic coping tools, basically, and it's or problematic, masking behaviors. And in my own work, I don't use the word problematic because we again, the language we use is important. So if I say, well, I'm doing this problematic thing, my brain is going to internalize that and be like, well, that means I'm doing something bad or wrong. It can start spiraling into, I should have done something differently. I should be better. And it kind of has more of like this negative connotation to this. So while I did like that they explained a lot of the things and pointed them out and like the functions of a lot of these problematic behaviors, in my work that I do, I use things more like helpful or unhelpful, sustainable or unsustainable. Because the thing is, in that moment, we are always doing the best that we can. If I'm turning to an unhelpful coping tool like scrolling, doom scrolling social media for 2 hours, or having some drinks after work, or avoiding a really big talk I need to have, is that the healthiest? Probably not, right? Like, none of those I would say like are amazing coping tools. But in the moment, that might be all that I have the energy for, that I have the resources for, the knowledge for, and I'm doing whatever I can to self-soothe and to protect myself and to survive that moment. And so I don't think that's a problem. Is it sustainable? Can I have several drinks after every single day of work without any negative consequences? No, that's probably not super sustainable, right? If I doom scroll on social media every day, is that going to be super sustainable? Probably not. So I'm a big language person, and because they were, again, the contradictory messages, they were saying, well, language is so important, but then basically calling out people for, they literally even use the word like, these are imperfect. And I'm like, everyone's imperfect. Like, no one's going to be perfect with their coping tools all the time. Like, life is really hard and we're always doing the best that we can. So I was a little bummed by those things. All right, my last take with what I didn't like about the book, and this kind of relates to something that I liked about the book, but it's how it was done. So I'm going to come back and do some praise about it. But there's a big chapter on burnout and capitalism. Love that. Spoiler alert. We're going to come back to that because yes, call it out. But there's a big but. When they talk about burnout and self care, again, burnout is one of my specialties. I'm a burnout coach and burnout therapist. It's what I do most of my social media on. I'm writing a book about it. Like it is my go-to. They basically talk about work-life balance as I think I even wrote it down that basically all you need to do, that like most people, most neurotypical people, just need baths and naps for self-care and they have a work-life balance and that their work-life balance is perfectly 50-50. As a burnout therapist, that hurt my heart to read that. That's a big no. Like, so I agree with their point was people, autistic people can't like regenerate with those things and need different types of resources and tools to deal with burnout and that like the 50-50 doesn't always work for them. So like I agree with that. And but I was like, nobody's life is 50-50 and like nobody gets cured from burnout from baths and naps. That's literally like the title of my upcoming book is like baths do not cure burnout. And so again, the language and the simplification and these generalizations, it just was a big ouch. And it almost like took away from their knowledge and expertise on how I do believe that burnout's going to impact an autistic person differently. And I wanted to better understand that. But then they're just like crapping on self care. And I'm like, this is an interesting hot take here. So if you are still with me, thank you for letting me be my nitpicky copy editor in high school and college self. Big language person. That's why I'm a narrative therapist. I love language. I didn't hate the book though. I did give it a 2. And for folks who are autistic or thinking that they might be autistic, I did give it a 5 out of 5. And here's why. They do a great job throughout the book talking about stigma, the shame, the systemic issues of things, the myths, the stereotypes, all of that. And it's very empowering. So, anytime we are tackling unhelpful systems and taking away stigma from people and raising awareness, I am all aboard. And that is really one of, I think, the main themes throughout this book is taking that shame and stigma away. And people who grew up thinking that like these things are bad or not normal really being like this is a safe thing and let's be authentic and let's like you're amazing. So love that. They also do a great job of talking about, like I said, like the systemic issues. So what does that mean? I'm a systems therapist. I'm a marriage family therapist. So that's how my brain works, is we are a little piece of the puzzle and our lives are impacted by so many things. So we think about our friendships, our families, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, the churches that people go to, the laws that impact us, the time frame that we live in. All of these things impact everything, really. And so I really like that they called out some of the systemic things and like kind of lit a fire under some of those things. Again, that's going to help take away the stigma that like we as one puzzle piece often take on all of the responsibility. And it's like, no, no, no. There's all these other things that are responsible for some of this stuff. They do a great job. I think one of the other big themes throughout the book is about community. I'm a sucker for community. I know we, as humans, even us introverts, we are built for attachment and community. And if you're autistic, that can be really hard to find, like a safe community. And so I loved that they gave several examples multiple times throughout the book. It was not just like a one time thing. It was here's how to find safe community, here's how to find your people. You deserve to find your community. You deserve to be able to unmask and be real and just like be amazing. They gave hashtags that you can follow, they gave online resources, they gave support groups, they gave ways to find in person things. Like any which way you're looking for community, they got you covered. And so I really loved that because I'm a big community person, and that's also how we're going to be able to take away a lot of that shame and stigma is realizing like we are part of a community. Okay. I also really liked, and this makes sense because the main focus of the book, or that's called Unmasking Autism, they do a great job of talking about the impacts of masking. So, masking is one of those terms that's kind of like a buzzword right now, where we're hearing a lot of people talk about it. But I really liked learning like the deeper meaning behind it. And I think that's what's going to be super relatable to people who are reading this, trying to learn more about themselves. So it talked a lot about how exhausting it is, how internalized a lot of the shame and stigma can be, and then how to unmask and embrace that authenticity and doing what we want versus what we think like we should be doing. So they do a lot of self-compassion work, which I'm a big fan of. So I really liked all of their stuff on masking. It seemed very relatable, very empowering, and lots of like tangible exercises for folks to kind of like do some reflection and then do things in a safe way. So I really liked that. Oh, one of my favorite things about the book is that they do a great job of talking about literally called, sorry, I keep going back and forth between this. So they discuss gender, race, sexual orientation, all these different aspects of identity and how those can shape and impact autism differently for people, which makes sense because it says it's discovering the new faces of neurodiversity. And one of their main themes is how diverse and unique a lot of these things are for people. So historically, autism was considered like a very middle class white male child thing. Um, we now know that like well, a lot of people actually had autism, but they were getting diagnosed as other things or it wasn't safe. They were getting punished for things, same behaviors, but because they looked differently or because they had different resources, they would get punished or there were more negative consequences for them. And so I really like that they focused on, for some people, masking wasn't just about like fitting in with, the kids at school, but for some people it's safety. Like if there's certain situations where you need to mask certain things because it could be a life or death thing. And so I like that they like real talked it, right? Like this is not just, oh, like this is they were very real about it. And so I think that it was really good showing again, it just makes it more relatable. And that's the nuance that I'm talking about. We can't just say, oh yeah, this is what autism's like for everyone. Here's what masking's like for everyone. It's going to be different depending on our age, our gender, our safety with our family, our race, our cultural norms, so many things. It's going to impact how we behave. So the other big thing I like, because again, I love like tackling the system, taking down the man, is they do a great job. Besides the little like subtle digs at self-care and like taking bubble baths, they do a great job of talking about how our capitalistic society harms autistic people. I hate the capitalist society that we live in for just in general. But it was amazing to see truly how awful it is and like the stuff that we need to get done of how much we get focused on productivity and the language about functioning and even one of my favorite lines in the book was how people who are autistic might have like hyper fixating on like hobbies. That can be a stereotype, but it can also be true for some people. And if their hobby or their interest is like not productive or earns money in some ways, more of like a fun hobby for them, it gets labeled as weird or childlike or immature or whatever label is going on. So let's say like this person is spending, all their free time on their hobby, but it's just not making them any money. We're going to say, well, that's really weird. But we look at the people who are working 80-hour work weeks, living their lives for their job, sacrificing family time for their job, doing everything for their job. We don't say that's weird. We don't say that's immature. We don't say, I mean, I have some choice words for those people and those companies that expect that. But in our society, that is viewed as, oh, it just got really dark here. There we go. In our society, we view those people as hardworking, really dedicated to their jobs, working hard to provide for their families. Isn't that so messed up? So much of our society is based on productivity and I think that chapter alone was really good in highlighting just like how harmful a lot of these norms are for autistic people. I also think they did a really good job of just raising awareness of how people can take advantage of autistic people. So a lot of these folks might be lonely or wanting to feel that, again, like we're meant for attachment, we're meant for community. And so someone can take advantage of that and then financially exploit them or manipulate them in ways. And that's not cool. So they didn't sugarcoat it. They gave like a really good list of how to like look out for these like red flags in people and then how to safely like empower yourself to set boundaries and take care of yourself. So I really like that. I really like that they had a lot of reflection questions and exercises that you can walk through and learn more about yourself. So all in all, I would recommend this book for adults who are curious if they are autistic or if you've felt excluded and like thought about that word masking before to fit in. This could be a really good exploratory book for you. I would not recommend this book if you are just wanting to learn more about autism or if you are like a professional or ally trying to better work with clients or be a better ally to a loved one. This book is not for us, and that's okay. Not all the books have to be for us. So 5 out of 5 if you are exploring that. If you want to use it as more of like a professional book, there's other books out there. So all in all, that was my thoughts. Thanks for letting me be a little neurotic with some of my language stuff. Let me know your thoughts on the book. If you've got suggestions for other books you want me to scope out and see if it's a good fit for you, let me know. I've got the next book already planned and I'm super excited about it. But thank you so much for watching and take care.